Hi, this is Dan Behringer back with you as we go through our series on the introduction to Agile. Now, in the previous session, we talked about how Agile is important as a delivery methodology based upon the operating environment. But we also talked about the fact that Agile is more than just a methodology. In this session, we're going to talk about that mindset, the core values, and the principles behind Agile before we get into the workings of an Agile team called the Scrum. So just by review, session 1, Agile, what's the big deal? This session, Agile Mindset, core values and principles, followed by the Scrum. We'll then talk about Agile roles and then explore planning from a project management perspective in Agile. And this, of course, is the session called Agile Mindset, Core Values and Principles. Now, from the previous presentation or session, we also talked about the more than a life cycle that is primarily applied to software development projects, where we can iterate very quickly through configuration and development needed to deliver working software. And again, it draws on the need for a variety of inputs and perspectives. So we want a very broad perspective contributing, or set of perspectives, I should say, contributing to the deliverables. That means our teams must be self-organizing, self-directing, self-correcting, and I also like to consider self-recognizing. That's my input. That's not necessarily in the body of Agile methods and practices and things like that. Let's talk about these just for a second. Why is it so important for an Agile team to be self-organizing, self-directing, self-correcting, and self-recognizing? The primary purpose for this is because everyone has value. Everyone is providing the value of their skills and experiences to help make the team better. We're greater than the sum of the individual parts. That happens when the team can understand how best to work together. The team, as subject matter experts, understand how best the priorities should be addressed, because as they work together, and that's kind of the Scrum aspect. In rugby, it's kind of pushing on each other in order to get the outcome, which is the ball pops out and then you go back to work. And that's kind of how teams work. We are all contributing at a very, in a strong way. We want the strongest contribution. And that's why I've added this term self-recognizing. The team recognizes the value of each other's contributions, so it's much easier for them to form together and work as one unit, all pulling on the rope in the same way. And again, by review, transparency gives us visibility into the work that enables inspection. We are transparent so that we can see what's working, what's not working, which enables adaptation as we learn as we go. Many of these topics are discussed in greater detail on our blog at projectsbydesign.net/blog. I'd be more than happy to have you go out there and take a look. The 10 things I've learned as a project manager, the Principles of Disciplined Agile series, and so on. But let's talk about the mindset. You may have heard this before, that Agile is a mindset. And this Agile funnel, as we go through it, is something that is typically described as the Agile funnel, which takes us from the mindset through our values to our principles and off to our practices. So what is the mindset all about? It's a commitment. The team members are all in on the team to achieve those self-described goals. In other words, we don't have a single person directing the work. We have the team coming together to self-direct the work. That's because everyone is all in on the solution. When you have someone directing the work, they are accountable for the solution. That means that sometimes the team members don't necessarily feel like they have to buy in from a commitment standpoint. They just have to do the work, and the person directing the work owns the solution. We want the team to own the solution and the team to have that level of commitment in order to make sure that solution works, because the solution will always be better because everyone throws all of their experiences and skill sets together to make it work, which means there's a focus. The work of the sprint is the focus of the team member's contribution. Now, one of the things that's often very difficult is in Agile, we want the team 100% allocated as much as we possibly can. Most organizations really struggle with this, but this erodes the focus of the team if they are not 100% dedicated to the deliverables within the sprint. Sometimes people see that's inefficient use of resources. Inefficiency is not necessarily that big of a concern from a resource standpoint as long as the deliverable is efficient. In other words, we're getting a higher degree of quality and a higher degree of throughput from the team, not necessarily from the individuals. There's a lot more to be said about that. You can see some of that in our blogs as well. Openness. A collaborative spirit exists where everyone shares challenges and success. What could we have done better? What could we, what did we really do well? We want to recognize that and celebrate our accomplishments. Respect gets back to what we were talking about. Everyone contributes equally. We all understand and value each other's contributions, and the courage to do the right thing at the right time. If it's not working, stand up and say so. The team needs to recognize what is working, what is not working, and have the courage to address those things that are not working so that we can get them fixed and create an environment to do so. Which drives us to those core values. Agile as a mindset is described by 4 core values. Those 4 core values, as described in 2001, is first of all, individuals in interactions over processes and tools. In other words, when people come together in agreement, that is your process, right? That's the outcome that you've desired in your process. So rather than, follow a set of steps which may not necessarily be the right step for that situation, we follow understanding and mutual consent to proceed. Also, working software over comprehensive documentation. In other words, if it works, we're done. Now, that's not to say that support documentation and things like that is not needed. It absolutely is needed to transition it over to operations. But most project documentation is only good during the life of the project. So we want to be careful that we don't spend time doing unnecessary work documenting things for stuff that's already delivered or stuff that's already working, just to be consumed by other project team members. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So let's not set ourselves up, and by the way, when we say contract negotiation, we don't necessarily just mean buyer and seller negotiation. It's also negotiation between resource managers and the team, for example. Once we have a mutual understanding on how we're going to proceed, let's do that and only do those things, once again, that are necessary work to make sure that we're covered, whether that be an actual, contract between buyer and seller. We wouldn't necessarily have very drawn out contract negotiations because we want to get started with the work. So that's going to influence, I should say, the contract types that we're going to use in Agile as well. And then most importantly to me, and this is the one I value of these most, is that responding to change over following a plan. When I was a young project manager, I was very proud of my project plans. The schedule was done very, very well, very informed, and I would feel like I was being challenged in my profession and in my skill sets if something on the schedule changed as soon as I published it, right? As soon as I put it out in front of the team, somebody looked at it and said, I'm not so sure that's exactly the way it should work. And you know what? They were right. In other words, that's okay, because I want to make sure that I get those changes baked into the plan in a way that we're adapting and moving. And so rather than stick to the script, so to speak, we're going to set our boundaries and give freedom within those boundaries to adapt and move as we need to. Then the Agile core values lead to 12 principles. Now, in this video, I'm not necessarily going to go through all 12 principles. That would take too much time. They are already in the coursework that you need for your PMP exam, or if you're going for some other certification. So I will tell you that for the PMP certification exam, you'll want to find those 12 principles. They're actually in the materials that PMI produces. You'll need to be aware of those Agile principles as you take the PMP certification exam. For the PMI ACP exam, we recommend that you memorize the Agile principles and also understand how they are to be applied in situations. What principle are we following here? What principle are we following there? What principle is not being followed? And so on and so forth based upon those situations. For the Disciplined Agile Scrum Master or the Senior Scrum Master for Disciplined Agile, you're going to get a modified set of core values and principles that are inherent with Disciplined Agile. There are 5 core values and 8 principles. You'll see that here in just a bit. The next then is, once you have your mindset in place, the 4 values, the 12 principles, then there is unlimited set of practices you can choose from for the team to run. In other words, we don't need to necessarily be prescriptive about how we do Agile. I kind of get a kick out of, there's a lot of times, I hear people say, that's not the right way to do Agile. But the way that they're doing it follows a set of practices that are generally accepted in the industry for certain things. And so we have to be careful that we don't become prescriptive about Agile, which I think is the primary value within Disciplined Agile, because it gives you options and helps you decide on those options. More about that here in just a bit. So what does those unlimited practices mean? Well, what it means is, as the team self-organizes, they choose the practices they will adopt for the Scrum. They can include methods, practices, norms, and behaviors. And the selections are typically made from recognized Agile and Lean practices in use today. In other words, they're not something unique that you're just kind of making up on a whiteboard or something like that. Now, having said that, one of the things that's very important to understand for Agile is that it requires training in the methodology. It does require training in the methodologies and the practices. The other thing, and I'm going to slip a little bit more into Disciplined Agile here as well, is we tend at Projects by Design to get away from the concept of best practice. Why? When we say best practice, there's a tendency for people to hear that as if it's the best practice that can be universally applied. And there are a lot of very good practices that are best applied in certain situations. But there is no one best practice that can be applied to all situations. So we try to stay away from this term best practice, if you will. That's why you don't see that in our presentation here. What it doesn't mean is that the team can do whatever it wants when it wants. That's not the point. The point is that once a practice is chosen, it doesn't necessarily mean they can just modify the practice however they want. Why? because those practices are proven in how they operate and how effective they are. I've seen this kind of taken advantage of in some organizations. I'm thinking of one in particular where the product owner felt like, well, we're agile now, so we're going to get rid of all practices. And they just did whatever they wanted when they wanted. They were a software provider, a seller, and they began to lose customers as a result. Why? Because it was all over the place and people never knew what to expect would be coming next. They had no sense that their priorities were being covered because they were just working however they wanted to, and now we're agile. That's not a good idea. And they lost revenue as a result until they got it into control. Disciplined Agile. Disciplined Agile is a decision framework based upon the mindset. Okay, and so there may be some discussion if you're a Disciplined Agile purist of what is the starting point for Disciplined Agile. And by the way, I've just interposed Disciplined Agile on the Agile funnel just for illustrative purposes. But Disciplined Agile is a framework, but that framework all is derived from the same mindset. That we're going to have self-directed, self-organizing, self-correcting, and self-recognizing teams. It's described by 5 core values, defined by 8 principles, so it's narrowed down to 8 principles. And then within the framework, there are about 600 different practices that the team can choose from. And there's a way of walking through the decision framework, which Disciplined Agile provides, so that you can come up with the best set of practices, starting with the complexity of what you're trying to do, the methodology you choose, the life cycle choices, all of these various things, the environment in which you work in, all of these things to come up with the best set of practices for your situation. That's why I love Disciplined Agile, and we're finding it's becoming very effectively used in a growing number of organizations. Now, if you want to know more about that, you can read the Principles of Disciplined Agile series at projectsbydesign.net/blog. We'd love to see you out there on the site. So once again, all things Projects by Design are at projectsbydesign.net. We're all about building project management capabilities, whether for yourself or for your organization. Reach out to us, contact at projectsbydesign.net. 843-480-0388. Next, we'll talk about the Scrum.